Hi and welcome to this lesson on power and authority aimed at Year 11 GCSE Sociology, studying the unit social stratification. And today is looking mainly at key concepts. So what's the difference between power and authority, and asking the question, who has power in society? So make sure you've got the title and the objective or the big question and today's date. To get us started, pause here, retrieval grid. My lot, you know what you're doing. So 12 questions varying from last lesson all the way back to stuff from last year. Pause, number in the margin, write the answer down. Don't need to write the question out. Quick retrieval. How quickly can you get those 12 questions done? And the answers then. So question number 1, what's the name of the feminist who looked at patriarchy in society that we studied last lesson? That was Sylvia Walby. Question 2, name 3 of the 6 ways she believed patriarchy is upheld in society. She looked at the household, so things like Anne Oakley, Duncan and Marsden, paid work, the state, sexuality, male violence over women, and cultural institutions. And it was liberal feminism that believed we should use the law to gain equality. Number 4, what did Weber mean by market situation? So Weber, instead of talking about social class, he talked about market situation. It's the money you are able to make from your work, the income that you have. Number 5, how might inequality be functional? So that's obviously a functionist idea, that idea that it ends up with the top people getting the top jobs, it rewards hard work, it rewards the most able. Number 6, false class consciousness is a Marxist concept that the working class don't know they're being exploited by the bourgeoisie. Then, on research methods from the previous topic, what does PET stand for when studying research methods? That's the practical, ethical, and theoretical. An advantage of over-observation is that it's ethical, so it's out in the open, and people know they're being observed. And an advantage of covert observation is that there is no Hawthorne effect. So it might be incredibly unethical to observe people undercover, but you don't get the Hawthorne effect. You don't get people changing their behaviour because they're being watched. A norm is an expected way of behaving, for example, getting in a queue, and a value is something that everyone believes in, something that everyone aspires to in society. And your identity is the way you see yourself and others see you. So as always, if you didn't know the answer, write it in, but in a different colour so that you know how to revise and what to revise when you look back, and give yourself a mark out of 12. Okay, power and authority then, some key concepts, and I'm going to need you to pause here and write these down. I'm going to talk through them first. 3 main ones that we're going to use today. So power is the ability of people to exert their will and get their own way. So if you have power, it means you get what you want, and you're able to get what you want in society and get what you want in your everyday life. Authority is power that you have because people view it as fair and right that you have that power. So if it's legitimate power, it's authority. So for example, a teacher might have authority over a student because the student accepts that it's right to do what the teacher tells them to do. Coercion is when a person is forced to do something that they don't want to do necessarily. So it's not legitimate, but people feel they have no choice. So people can be coerced into something if a person has power, but it's not legitimate. If the person without power feels they're being forced into doing something. So pause here, jot those 3 concepts down. They're all named on the specification. You'll need to know all of those. Okay, quick little thinking task for you then. I know obviously we'd love to have a discussion about this, but it's not right at the moment in this kind of lesson. But have a think about these people. Why might they be seen as powerful? What gives them their power? You might want to pick a couple and just sort of make a little mind map or jot down some ideas. So you've got Boris Johnson, who's the Prime Minister, Marcus Rashford, famous footballer, but also has made headlines for supporting children from disadvantaged backgrounds. We've got Kim Kardashian, so obviously very wealthy, but we might want to think about social power and her social media presence. The Queen, where does her power come from? And then you've got Donald Trump, maybe not so powerful anymore this week, and Kim Jong-un, who is in charge of North Korea. And if you know anything about North Korea, you might want to have to think about where he gets his power from. So pick a couple, jot your ideas down, and we'll come back to these in a second. So pause here and jot down some ideas. Where do these people get their power from? Right, so there are two main ways of defining power and authority. The first one is by comparing formal and informal power. So formal power is organized power. So you have power, for example, because you are high up in an organization, you've earned that power, and it's placed in terms of your position within that group. So for example, it might be that you are the boss of a company. You have power. You hire people, you fire people. It might be that teachers have power over students because of our position, because of our place, because it's our classroom. It's sort of not literally, but figuratively, we are in charge of the classroom. We have power to make students do what they want to do. So we have formal and informal. Informal is when a person gains power not because they have a title or a job or a position, but because of the knowledge or respect that they gain. So an example of that might be within a peer group, you end up with somebody who tends to be the leader, somebody who tends to be sort of the trendsetter, the one that people follow. They haven't been given a title, they haven't been given a job, but they have informal power and authority. They have control over people. People might want to copy what they wear and things like that because they are seen as aspirational, somebody to sort of look up to. So formal and informal is one way that we can define different types of authority and how people have power in society. Another way is by looking at the work of Max Weber. So same dude that we looked at last week. And Weber came up with 3 different sources of power and authority. So the first one was traditional. And for Weber, this was based on traditions and customs. So this is things like titles, being part of certain families, certain groups. And an example here, the clearest example is the British monarchy. So go back to those pictures, go back to those sort of famous people. The Queen would be an example of traditional authority. She has authority because of who she is and the traditions and the customs that go along with that. She's just a lady in her 90s. She's, nothing physically different to anybody else, but the tradition and the custom behind the British monarchy, the kings and queens that have been around for centuries, give her this authority, this traditional authority. She has legitimate power in this country. The second type by Weber was charismatic authority. Weber said some people have authority just because of their personality, that they are able to draw people into following them, to being devoted to them and being obedient to them. Now, examples of that might be people like Hitler, might be, if we go back to those pictures, perhaps Donald Trump might be seen as a charismatic authority because of who he was before he became the president. So he had this kind of capital behind him. Kim Kardashian is another one. She encourages devotion. She doesn't have any traditional authority. And when you get there, you realize she doesn't have any rational legal authority. So it's that kind of social media icon is there and sort of inspires devotion and people to follow them. The third type by Weber was rational legal authority. So this is kind of like the formal authority from the previous slide. People who have authority based on sets of rules and laws, job titles that they have. So, for example, teachers, the police, the courts, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, they all have authority because of the position and kind of the job contract, the situation that they find themselves in. So Weber said that there were 3 different sources of power and authority. Can you make sure that you've got those 3 down? They're all named on the spec again. You have to know what the 3 of them are. And can you make sure that you give an example of each one? Okay, so make sure you've got the definition and the examples. So pause and do that. Next thing I'd like you to do is a bit of a task, so a bit of a writing task. It's really self-explanatory. When I finish talking, if you pause and complete this one. So look at the following situations in which people are using their power in modern Britain. Decide whether they are using authority or coercion, and if it's authority, say which of Weber's types of authority it is. Then give reasons for your answer. Sometimes there's no right or wrong, so you can make a really good case for one. You can interpret it one way, someone else might interpret it another. That's absolutely fine. And we will be going through all of this when we get back to school and using some examples. So question number 1, does a teacher who puts a student in detention for not doing their homework do that out of authority or coercion? And if it's authority, which type is it? Secondly, a school pupil who beats up other pupils if they won't give him or her money. Thirdly, a religious leader who persuades people to join him or her in living on a remote tropical island, dedicating their lives to their religion. Number 4, the Queen, who expects people to bow and curtsy to her and follow rules about how they address her and how they speak to her. Okay, so pause, say for each of those, is it authority or coercion? And if it's authority, which of Weber's 3 types is it? Is it traditional, charismatic, or legal rational? Next task is to have a go at applying what we know about the 4 main theories on social stratification to power. So I want you to pause and have a think. What would functionalists think about power? What would Marxists think about power? Who has it? Where does it come from? What might Weber have said about it? And what will feminists think about it? Now, you should absolutely be able to do Marxism and feminism. I'd expect most of you to be able to do functionalism and some of you to have a go at Weber. So pause and have a think. What would each of those theories say about who has power and where it comes from? Okay, I'm not going to abandon you. I am going to give you the answers, but I'm hoping that you're having a go for yourself. So functionalism, okay, link back to what we talked about before. Power is best held by those most qualified and talented in society who use their leadership skills for the good of everybody. So they would argue that if you get to the top positions in society, it's because you're the most capable and the most able, and you want to use your leadership skills for the good of all. We can have a debate about that, can't we, when we get back to school. Marxists argue that political power is held by the bourgeoisie. So if you own the means of production, you also own the power in society. And that they would argue, and it's exactly a repeat of what we've talked about before, there's a small group who hold social power, who hold society's power, and they get that from their wealth. They get that because they own the means of production, they own the land, they have the money, they have the capital, they have the buildings, they employ people, and that gives them power. Weber, so again, it repeats his theory. Power is linked to your market situation, so your social class, but that's not the whole picture. So remember, he said that social stratification is based on more than just money, it's also your status. So he would look at all the different groups within society and say which ones tend to have the most power. And he might say it's white, upper class, so we might look at ethnicity, we might look at, yes, social class, we might look at age, so he might say middle-aged men, and we might look at gender. So again, it's men who dominate. So Weber said, yep, your class is part of it, but it's not the whole picture. We also need to look at your status in society. And feminists, no surprises, feminists like Wolby would say society is patriarchal, that power is held by men and used to protect their interests. And you can think about what Wolby said about those 6 areas in which men exert patriarchal power over women. Make sure you've got all that down, pause where you need to do that, and then we'll move on. Okay, so final thing I'd like you to do, an example of an exam question that you might get based on today's lesson. So can you have a think? I want you to have a go. I'm not going to give you the success criteria for this one. I want you to see how much you can remember. It's a really straightforward question. What's your success criteria? How would you answer it? And then have a go. So the question is, describe 2 types of authority identified by Max Weber, and it's worth 4 marks. So really simple, 2 types, 4 marks means 2 marks for each type. How are you going to get those 2 marks for each of one of Max Weber's types of authority? So jot that answer in your book. It should only be 2 sentences or so. And then upload everything for me so that I can have a really good look at it. Miss you all. Take care.